All right, let's start off by saying Barakatah Yahweh, Bahashem Yahushai, Bahashem Rakha Kodash. All right, welcome to another live lesson. The name of this one is The Cruel Lord is Creating a Recipe for Disaster. And, there's a lot going on right now, a lot of psyops, a lot of diversionary tactics. And, I don't know where the Spirit is going to lead on this one. The Lord's will, it'll be edifying. But, there's a lot of stuff I've been looking up this morning, videos and different actual footage of that incident in the train, and it's just a lot of distractions, a lot of, what's the word I'm looking for? A lot of anger provoking, racial provoking, incidents occurring. And one thing about the media, it's pretty much witchcraft. It's a medium. When you look up the word media, it goes back to the word medium. Like you had a witch. She was a medium between between the spirits, divination, or the spirits, familiar spirits, or whatever the case may be, and the person that she was talking to or he was talking to. And pretty much, through the media, they pretty much cast a spell over these people to where anything they say on there or anything that you see, they can turn the narrative, and even though it's not what they're saying it is, but they use certain speech that's incendiary. It stirs up the flames, in these people. And the main thing they're stirring up the flames of right now is a serious racial tension, serious civil war tension, class war tensions, and a lot more other stuff that's just going on that's just off the hinges. Now, at the one video I was watching, which I just posted it in the comment section, I'm gonna post it again. It's a page by the name of the Ezra Klein Show. And the name of the video I was watching earlier was Trump is building his own paramilitary force. All right. And, that's pretty much the truth, So that kind of led me to start looking up certain terms, certain laws that Esau has enacted in the books. And Lord's will, we can, go through it and, like I said, make sense of it. But what I want to start off with first is the book of 2nd Ezra's 15th chapter, because these are the times that we're in. We're in the time of we're at the door of Jacob's trouble. As we speak right now, the National Guard, I believe they said, was it the National Guard? Yeah, I believe it was the National Guard, are actually in Chicago now. And these YN's reasonings are, God, watching a little short that was sent to me by, it was sent to me by one of the brothers, but it was an Anton Daniel short where you have these YNs talking how the military men today are, out of shape, they're frail, this, that, and the other. Yeah, for the most part they are, but the people they sending in there to deal with your ass, these are trained killers, mercenaries, I mean, you ain't just gonna shoot at them and y'all motherfuckers can't shoot anyway. You hit everything but the target, and brother made I guess he made like a little joke that it was a so-called gang member or something like that, gang related, that hit, this guy Chuck in the neck. And I said, nah, gang members, they can't shoot like that. That was 200 yards out, if it's real, but we coming to find out that it's a lot of BS. I just leave it at that. I was watching videos on that too. The train stabbing with the, Jake, the bugged out Jake with the Edomite chick from Ukraine. That was all BS. I saw an actual video of the real incident, you know, and it's nothing like, you know, or what they, well, then again, they didn't really show much, you know, but I'll just leave it at that, you know. Like I said, there's so much to talk about, but we're going to start off here in 2nd Ezra 15 and 16. It says, for there shall be sedition among men. We're at the door of this. Now, the word sedition means arising, and like inciting, people to come against the government, to overthrow the government. All right. Now let's just deal with that, because when you look at the word sedition, it's a compound word, and it literally means to go apart. All right. The word sed is apart, and the word itio, itio, is a going or to go. So sedition is to go apart, and that's pretty much what they're painting a narrative of Jake, the so-called Black, Latino, and Native American tribes as being a seditious group, because everything's being blamed on Jake. Black fatigue, and you got pastors talking about we got to warn our children of the dangers of Black people and all this crazy shit. You know what I mean? But this is all these devils setting the stage for a disaster. So that's why I said the cruel Lord is creating a recipe for disaster with all these different things going on right now. And it goes back to one of the models of the Illuminati, or the illuminated ones, is ordo ab chaos, which is order out of chaos. In order for them to really sweep things up, so to speak, and clean it up, there has to be some type of chaos so that they can have the justification to come in and bring in the order, establish the order. All right. So it says, for there shall be sedition among men. As a matter of fact, when you look the word sedition up, you can look it up here. You can read through it. And as you can see right here, sed, apart, and itio, a going or to go. So basically, the word sedition means to go apart. And it's when the common people, right, come together with the intention of taking the government, down, like a coup d'etat. All right. So it says, for there shall be sedition among men. So even among men, it says there's going to be sedition among them, because the basic, everyday, so-called law-abiding 9-to-5 working individual is going to be involved in this, because there's so much information out there that they're starting to see that everything that's going on is pretty much just a hoax. It's not real. It's just a play on people's emotions. Now, some people are just that retarded, big Happy Meal sandwich eating individuals that, just work off of their emotions because of them goddamn parasites that's tearing them up. But then you have a lot of people that are, watching alternative media and different social media platforms that are bringing out the truth about what's actually going on behind the scenes. And it's going to stir up anger and strife in them to raise up pretty much against the government and against these officials that are straight up corrupt to the core. So it says, and invading one another. So they're going to fight against each other, because you're going to have race wars, class wars, so on and so forth. It says they shall not regard their kings nor princes. So they're going to actually rise up against their rulers. That's what it means by kings and princes, meaning the rulers that are set up over them to keep them in control, like your governors, your mayors, your senators, congressmen, so on and so forth. The president, vice president, they're not going to regard anything that they say, because they're seeing that everything that they say is BS. And then they brought out that movie, I believe that was 2023, if I'm not mistaken, Civil War, and it pretty much paints a scenario as to really what's going on now, in so many words. It says, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power, meaning they're going to do whatever they feel is right for them to survive. So what this is going to bring about is something called anarchy. Anarchy pretty much is no law. you know, no law, pretty much. You know, anarchy is like no law, like the government or system that collapses and everything runs amok. So there's no law, no rules or regulations. You know, every man as they see fit, whatever they feel is right, that's what they're gonna go with. So, like I said, I was just playing around with the chat too. I mean, I didn't mention it, but I was playing around with the chat. This is how it pretty much started, you know. And I first thought that came to mind was, what are civil liberties? Because this is pretty much what mainly Esau, you know, is proud about. These are the things that they fight for, right? Is their civil liberties, the civil liberties of the so-called average American. So it says civil liberties are fundamental rights and freedoms that are guaranteed to individuals, typically by a constitution or legal framework, to protect them from government overreach or abuse. And this is pretty much what you see going on. This is why Trump, he ain't listening to anybody. He's just going amok. He's creating all these different wars. He's, you know, sending the National Guards into cities without no national emergencies, you know, just off of a whim, you know, and these things are not to be so, because when it comes to the military being used within the inner cities, they're not, the American government is not supposed to do that unless there is a national emergency. All right. You have something called the Posse Comitatus Act. Now, the Posse Comitatus Act was passed in 1878, right? And the word posse comes because right now you hear people talk about posse, you know, this guy's a posse or he's with a posse or whatever. The word posse was the shortened form of Posse Comitatus. You know, posse means power of a country, literally, right? Posse Comitatus. Now, the word posse, right, means power. It goes back to body of armed men summoned by sheriff to enforce law, right? And then comitatus is a body of companions. It says, or of a country when attached to posse. You know, so posse comitatus was the gathering of armed men, you know, which were the body of companions, and they were set up to, you know, bring down any insurrections or whatever the case may be. You know, and that, you know, that what that established was, you know, it limited. Matter of fact, let's go to it real quick. It says, because you know I've been, you know, been kind of messing around with the, and I got, you know, I should have went back. Okay, so I typed in, what is the Posse Comitatus Act? The Posse Comitatus Act is a federal law that generally prohibits the U.S. military, the Army, and the Air Force specifically from acting as a posse comitatus or otherwise enforcing domestic civilian law, right? That's what it was created and established for, because the original posse comitatus was the average people or armed men that the sheriff would go, you know, out there in England, places like that, and gather to help to enforce the laws of the land. You know, so this was enacted here in 1878 for the purposes of to limit that power of the military coming in, because once you declare martial law is the all legislation and rules of states and cities and all that are put down, and the rule of the military is put into place, right? So it says, enacted in 1878, the law was intended to prevent the military from abusing its power to carry out domestic law enforcement, as you see Trump doing right now. And there's no super national emergency going on to where they need the National Guard and need to declare martial law. So that's why they're creating all of these different things that you see going on right now, because you have to have a problem in order to get a reaction, in order to get a solution or bring about a solution, you know. And this is the same rule from the same playbook over and over again. Time and time again, no matter what country you go to. So this is a practice that occurred during the Civil War and Reconstruction. The act includes exceptions where Congress or the Constitution expressly authorizes military involvement in civilian law enforcement. All right. Now, you also have something called the War Powers Act. Now, if you just type in the War Powers Act, it's going to take you to the War Powers Act that was enacted by Congress in 1973 against Nixon, right? But the War Powers Act goes further back because the 1973 was really called the War Powers Resolution, all right? But the War Powers Act and the War Powers Resolution was a limitation. The actual War Powers Act was an increase of a presidential or executive branch authority over the military and government and things of that nature. Because when we go back to the War Powers Act in 1941, it says, yes, Congress passed the War Powers Act of 1941, also known as the First War Powers Act, because there were two of them. Those two powers enabled or gave more power to the president, that he wouldn't normally have under regular conditions. It says, which was signed into law by President Franklin D. Roosevelt on December 18, 1941, following the attack on Pearl Harbor. This emergency law granted the president broad authority to reorganize government agencies and streamline the war effort for World War II. All right. So they gave him broader authority over, things that he didn't have control over. Okay. To reorganize the government agencies, to be able to, to deal with World War II and this false flag known as Pearl Harbor, So you also have the War Powers Act of 1942, which further extended that power. All right. Then you have the War Powers Act or the War Powers Resolution of 1973. The War Powers Act of 1973, officially the War Powers Resolution, is a federal law passed over President Nixon's veto to limit the president's ability to commit U.S. forces to hostilities abroad without congressional approval. All right, so these tie in because one gave broad powers for the president to have over the military and other governmental agencies, and this one restricted that power. All right. It said it requires a president to notify Congress within 48 hours of deploying troops. So this right here, the War Powers Resolution Act of 1973, is supposed to limit the president's ability to call on the military for whatever, without the approval of Congress. And this is why this guy, Nero Trump, he's a madman because he's doing whatever the hell he wants. It says from deploying troops into situations where hostilities are imminent, and mandates that forces be withdrawn within 60 to 90 days unless Congress authorizes further use of force. Right, because once a national emergency is declared, that would last about 60 to 90 days, or as long as that period of that commotion would last till they put it fully down. After that, it would die down. So the law aims to ensure both the executive and legislative branches share responsibility in decisions to use military force. So here it is. Trump is going beyond that. He's, stepping over boundaries that he's not supposed to be stepping over. But it's all set up by the heads over him. It has nothing to do with Trump. If you left it up to Trump, he would just live in McDonald's and eat fucking, burgers and fries all goddamn day, with his big purple hand. All right. So that, painted all that. So like I said, when you go back, I'm going to put it in here again. the Ezra Klein show, or the Ezra Klein show. So it says Trump is building his own paramilitary force. All right. So going back to the chat, it says, "What are the civil liberties?" We read that. It's set up to protect the average citizens from government overreach or abuse. They ensure that people can live freely, express themselves, and participate in society without unjust interference from the state. Key examples of civil liberties: freedom of speech, freedom of religion, freedom of the press, right to privacy, right to due process, freedom of assembly, right to petition the government, protection from unreasonable searches and seizures, right? So these are not supposed to be infringed upon, but the reason why they're being infringed upon right now is because they're pretty much pushing that out the way, because they're bringing in the new world order. And the new world order is one religion, one world, one currency. And we see the direction of the world going that way. So this is why you see all of these different incidences going on throughout the world, but dealing here in America, you have a lot of these so-called crimes going on, so that it can give the excuse to the president to declare a national emergency, so that all of these rights and privileges can be shut off. Because what these freedoms are doing is it's exposing the hand of the hidden masters, and they can't have that, because their main thing, or their main power, was secrecy. And although they're allowing a lot of stuff to come out, they still want to control the narrative over these things. All right. It says where civil liberties come from. In the United States, civil liberties are primarily found in the U.S. Constitution, especially the Bill of Rights, the First Amendments. Later, such as the 14th Amendment, which extended. Later amendments such as the 14th Amendment, which extended protections to actions by state governments. You have civil liberties versus civil rights. Civil liberties are freedoms protected by from government action. Civil rights are the right that ensure equal treatment and protection under the law. All right. Now, so what I did was I typed in, "Are President Donald Trump's recent actions in 2025 threatening the civil liberties of America?" It says there are credible concerns raised by experts, civil rights groups, and courts that some of Donald Trump's actions in 2025 pose threats or potential threats to civil liberties. And this is why people are in an uproar, especially the ones that voted for him. It said, and this is why now you're starting to understand why it says there shall be sedition among men and invading one another. They shall not regard their kings nor princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in their power. Because they're seeing that no matter what we do, we try to do the right thing, pay the bills, pay our taxes, live, lawfully, follow the laws. And no matter what we do, we're still behind the 8 ball. So they're going to get to the point where it'll be like, the hell with following these rules and regulations. We're going to follow our own rules and regulations. It says it's not settled in every case. Many are being litigated, but there are enough developments to warrant serious attention. I'll outline some of the main issues, and then we can consider what arguments support our counter the concern. What actions are raising concerns? Here are a few of Trump's actions or proposed actions in 2025 that critics say could threaten civil liberties with what is known so far. And I'm just going to read just the main point. Ending or restricting DEI. Brother's been going into this. I'm not an expert in all of that, so I leave that to the experts. Affirmative action, equity programs, which affect Jake, but it also affects a lot of Edomites, which are the main ones that are pretty much benefiting from these different, programs that the government has given out there. So bullet point 2, ending radical indoctrination in K-12 schooling, executive order. Number 3, birthright citizenship executive order, which says that if you have illegal immigrants here in America and they have children, their children are not naturalized because their parents were not legally here. So they're looking into this. They're discussing these things. The court is, keeping them at bay on that topic, but they're pushing the narrative. Number 4, shifts in oversight, civil rights enforcement, and procedural protections. Number 5, use of executive orders, claims of overreach, right? Because with those executive orders, the president can, overreach his power because, what keeps the president in check is the Congress. But with this individual, Donald Trump, the madman, the crew lord, he's not abiding by the rules. He's overstepping his boundaries. Number 6, removal of watchdogs, inspector generals. Okay. So what civil liberties might be at risk? Once again, free speech and academic freedom, freedom of association, equal protection / non-discrimination, due process, state and local autonomy, press / oversight. And I'm not going to read all these, every little detail in there because I'm just trying to get to the main points. So it says, let's see, many other order courts. All right, so I'm going to read this. So I'm going to just go straight to the chat's evaluation. My evaluation, are they threats? Yes. It says many of these actions do appear to pose real threats to civil liberties. And, if you know anything about these, good old boys, these so-called Americans, these, these conquerors and, takers, of Gad's land and the other tribes' lands, they are extremely proud of their civil liberties. They fight tooth and nail to keep, their civil liberties, right? It says particularly for marginalized or vulnerable communities. And we got to keep this in mind here because I use this to ask my next question. The risk is real that some of these moves could chill, freeze expression, especially on campuses or in advocacy organizations. And if it stops the freedom of expression, freedom of speech in these particular areas, what do you think it's going to do to religious freedoms? Religious figure of speech. Freedom of speech. It says reduce protections for immigrants, weaken oversight and accountability, right? Because oversight and accountability, these civil liberties are set in there to counterbalance or to check the president or the government's overreach, and infringement upon the people's rights. And this is why these Edomites are up in arms, especially the ones that voted for Trump, because they're seeing that their civil liberties are being, affected, threatened. It says shift power in ways that upset the balance between state, federal, local, and between branches of government, right? Because the different branches of government were set up to keep each other in check. But the executive branch, which is the president, he's not listening to the rules. He's just doing whatever the hell he wants. So it says whether those threats become full violations depends on how courts rule, how laws are enforced, how Congress responds, and how civil society pushes back. And that's why they're doing these things too, to get the people roused up. That's why you see in so-called incidents like, or alleged incidents like that train, stabbing in the neck of that Ukrainian chick and that, what they call a bugged out Jake. It says, so I use the talking point, right? Because it went into something else, but I use the talking point, as I said here, where they say that yes, many of these actions do appear to pose real threats to civil liberties, particularly for marginalized or vulnerable communities. So this is what I asked the chat based off of that. So according to your evaluation, can Black and Hispanic communities be considered marginalized or vulnerable communities? Yes. In both historical and current contexts, Black and Hispanic communities in the United States are widely considered marginalized and vulnerable populations. This is based on measurable disparities systemic patterns of exclusion, and disproportionate impact of law and policy. And this is why, by Trump, hiring all these different ICE agents, you know, even the average citizen, whether they're Hispanic or so-called black, are in harm's way, because their thing is not, they don't care if you're here legally or not. Inside joke. All they care about is making money. They're looking at the more bodies they collect, the more money they collect. They don't care about differentiating between an actual U.S. citizen or not. So it says historical context: Black Americans, which are Judah, enslavement, Jim Crow laws, redlining, voter suppression, mass incarceration. Right, and this mass incarceration started right after this devil Lincoln so-called freed the slaves. The Emancipation Proclamation. He didn't free no slaves. Emancipation simply means to take from one hand and give it to the other. All right. So, and that's where the 13th Amendment comes in. And the reason why the 13th Amendment was enacted really was or used for the purpose of making Jakes criminals, because they know that once you were a criminal, then you had to work for free. And that's how they got free labor out of Jake, by making them, criminals, whatever type of criminal. It doesn't matter, just as long as they label you a criminal. They just grab you up, slap charges on you, and now you have a record. It says Hispanic/Latino Americans, displacement, example given after U.S. annexation of Mexican land, exclusion from civil rights protection, discriminatory immigration policies. And that's crazy, because they're even coming against GAD. Here it is, it's their land, and you're talking about deporting them. Deporting them where? Back to Israel? Back to Gilead? Because you don't belong here. So when are you going to be deported? Ongoing systemic disparities. Wealth and income gaps. Black and Hispanic households have significantly lower median wealth than white households. Education inequities. Schools in predominantly Black and Latino neighborhoods receive less funding and fewer resources. Healthcare disparities, higher rates of chronic illness, lower access to quality healthcare, lower insurance coverage, right, and lower standard of foods. Should have put in there. Criminal justice system, Black and Hispanic individuals are arrested, charged, and incarcerated at higher rates than whites for similar offenses. Employment discrimination, resume studies show less favorable outcomes for applicants with ethnic sounding names, all else equal. It says housing and environmental injustice, right? Greater exposure to pollution, lead, poor housing, and displacement due to gentrification. And you see Jake's neighborhood, they threw. Now, Jake in the hood, the Latin tribes, in the barrios and all that, you have a lot of deplorable conditions, but nothing compared to GAD on the res. That is the most deplorable tribe living, meaning their conditions, their living conditions are deplorable. I mean, to the point where they're pretty much, they destroyed GAD. And on their own land, they got them on these reservations through. So next time, you think you got it bad, go watch, some documentaries on the res and how bad they got it, and you'll count your blessings. Political vulnerability, and we're gonna get revenge on these devils. The Lord's gonna take this devil down, and he's gonna set us back up into the kingdom, and that's when we're gonna get our pound of flesh from him. Political vulnerability, voter ID laws, purging of voter rolls, gerrymandering, underrepresentation in political office at local, state, and federal levels, civil liberties at risk, surveillance and policing, higher police presence and surveillance in Black and Latino neighborhoods. Right, it's a lot of profiling, and that whole thing when Trump gave the green light to ICE, that pretty much had them profiling anyone that looks, sounds, like one of the Latin tribes. You're in harm's way, but that even extends to the so-called Black tribes, because now you're being affected by it. So it says free speech and protest, Black and Hispanic led protest movements, example given, BLM, often met with greater law enforcement force. Immigration enforcement, Hispanic communities are heavily affected by aggressive immigration policies, detention, and family separation. So conclusion, yes, Black and Hispanic communities are marginalized and vulnerable groups in the U.S. Civil liberties conversation, actions, or policies that restrict civil liberties, such as limits on protests, weakening of voting rights, and elimination of equity programs, tend to have disproportionate impacts on these populations. All right? So this is showing you that all of these things that you see happening are putting, and on top of that, the failing economy is putting Jake in a really bad situation and setting him up for Jacob's trouble. And then you have on the left hand or on the other hand, you have these Edomites that are being affected by everything going on now. See, Esau didn't have a problem, with the way that the government was operating when when the discrimination and the bad things were happening to Jake. But as soon as it started, leaning or going into their neighborhood and affecting them and their families, now all of a sudden they want to rally, they want to protest, they want to talk about we're in this thing together, man. No, we're not. You're only talking shit now because you've been pushed into a corner. Otherwise, you would have still been talking shit. You'd have still been, calling Jake niggas and spics and spooks and wetbacks and tontos and all that, but because your living situation and your, economic basis has changed to a lower status, now you want to rally with the troops, so to speak. Yeah, beautiful. Deuteronomy 37. And the Lord thy power will put all these curses upon thine enemies and on them that hate thee, which persecute thee. Right. So all this stuff is leading to the destruction of America. And building on the word sedition, which we read in Second Ezra's, I just want to show you here real quick. This is in the book of Ezra, chapter 4, with the nations. Because remember, Psalms 83 is, matter of fact, I believe Elder Pastor just did something on this, if I'm not mistaken. So many videos going up, so many different brothers, you can't keep track and you can't remember who did what, But Psalms 83 is a future, a future prophecy that is being established now, even as we speak right now. And all of these nations have always been against us, going all the way back to the beginning of when Jake was building up as a nation. All of these nations have always been against us. So in Ezra, the 4th chapter, right, it says, this is when they heard that Jake was building the temple again for the second time, they got nervous and they wanted, to disrupt the building. So they first came with, we want to help y'all build because, our forefathers, was building here. You're a bunch of heathens. You ain't got nothing to do with us. So what did they do from there? They started making our lives miserable, just like they're trying to do today. So what they did was they sent letters to Xerxes, I believe it was Xerxes. I haven't gone through this in a minute. And pretty much to have them stop the building of the temple. All right. And this is what they said in the letter. Ezra 4:13. Be it known unto the king that if this city be builded and the wall set up again, then will they not pay toll, tribute, and custom, and so that thou shalt damage the revenue of the kings, right? Because when you talk about somebody's finances, they get hot and bothered. Now, because we have maintenance from the king's palace, and it was not meet for us to see the king's dishonor, therefore have we sent and certified the king, that search may be made in the book of the records of thy fathers. So shalt thou find in the book of the records, and know that this city is a rebellious city, and hurtful unto kings and provinces, and that they have moved sedition within the same of old time, for which cause was this city destroyed. So when you go down here in the Old Testament, in the Hebrew, for the word sedition, just bear with me. The word sedition is ash thadawar. Ash thadawar. All right. And ash thadawar just means revolt, sedition, which the word revolt means to turn back, to overturn, a particular government. And we read sedition is to go apart. To go apart, so you have an established government, rules, regulations, laws, and someone that's seditious against it is trying to overturn or overrun the established government. And that's what Jake was labeled back then as. That's what Jake was labeled as during the Greek Empire. That's what Jake was labeled at, like the Maccabees. That's what Jake was labeled as during the Roman Empire. That's why a lot of them Israelites that were coming against the Roman Empire, whether they were physically trying to take them down or speak against them, that the Lord was going to destroy them and set up his kingdom, they would be sent to different penal colonies known as the Sporad Islands. That's how the Apostle John ended up on the island of Patmos. Now, the island of Patmos is within the Mediterranean Sea region. Revelation 1 and beautiful and 9. I, John, who also am your brother and companion in tribulation and in the kingdom and patience of Yahushua HaMashiach, was in the isle that is called Patmos. For what? For the word of the Most High and for the testimony of Yahushua. So he was charged with sedition against the Roman government, because the whole idea was that our forefathers back then were teaching. We were teaching that Yahushua was going to come and establish his kingdom on the earth and take down all these heathen governments. So when the emperors would hear of such things, or any officials or any people that were what's the word I'm looking for? Apologists for the Roman government, they would go and report it to the higher ups, and these individuals would get carried away and put into prisons, crucified, beheaded, whatever the case may be, or put on these Sporad Islands. Now you had, this was like a little further up though, I forget the exact year. You had something called the Frumentari, which I think that was Jake that actually set up the Frumentari. And that was a secret service of, the Roman Empire. Frumentari, right there we go. Frumentari. So it says the Frumentari were an ancient Roman military and secret police organization used as an intelligence agency. They began their history as a counter service and developed into an imperial spying agency. Their organization would also carry out assassinations. The Frumentari were headquartered in the Castra Peregrina and were run by the Princeps Peregrinorum. They were disbanded under the reign of Diocletian due to their poor reputation amongst the populace. Yeah, because they were scumbags. They were pretty much no different than the Sicarian, the cutthroats. You know, they would sit up, you know, in a market in different places where there were gatherings. You know, like today you have infiltrators. So these are the ancient infiltrators, the frumentari. You have infiltrators that'll come in and sit down and act like they like you, and they cool and they believe in what you believe in, and all of a sudden they just all the while they're just gathering information to try to bury you. They try to bury you, Jack. Inside joke. All right. Using informers and spies, women's occupation. So utilizing informers and spies had been a long-standing policy of the Roman legions and armies of occupation, but never in an organized fashion. This was especially true in the city of Rome, which was rife with whispers and endless conspiracies. The frumentari were possibly established by Domitian. Okay. So this is, you know, he created the frumentari, but they were infiltrating everybody. All right, so this goes back to roughly around 94, 95, 96 AD. Although they only appear in records shortly after his reign in the early 2nd century, when established, their base was located at the Castra Peregrina on the Chalin Hill. Though Trajan would later centralize their location in Rome, during the early history, they were tasked with supplying grain to the military, delivering messages between the provinces and the empire, and collecting tax money. I believe they were tax collectors or something like that, and then they turned into informants. So they were disbanded in 312 AD. That was Jake that was in rulership by Diocletian by this point. They served as secret police and as an intelligence agency in ancient Rome. So this whole CIA, FBI, all that stuff, that's nothing new. 007 and all that crap. Emperors would use them to gather information on friends, family, officials, or soldiers. This organization was sometimes tasked with assassinating whomever the emperor wished. Peasants disliked the frumentari due to false and arbitrary arrests. Did you see like these Jakes that be arresting the other Jakes? You get a harder time with Jake than you do with Esau. That's cops. They were seen as a tyrannical plague on the empire. These complaints led to the disbandment of the organization in 312 AD. All right. Let me just see something. Not coming up. The frumentari were likely created or organized into an official unit under Emperor Domitian, 81 to 96 AD. All right. So, you know, just secret, just a little nugget, you know. So pretty much these nations, they were accusing us of sedition. And that's what you see going on right now. That's why you see like little incident. And see, the thing is, it's not about, you know, isolating these events to one individual. This individual did that doesn't mean that all these individuals of the same race or belief, you know, are all, you know, do the same thing. But the ignorance of the American people, you know, let the media paint that narrative into their minds, you know, that every single so-called black person or Latino person is a cutthroat, is a thief, is a drug dealer. You know, the women are hoes and skanks, which most of them are, but not every one of them. But this is why Esau's doing that, because he's putting everything into categories, categorizing everything so that when they come, they're going to come hard and they're going to come fast. You know, Operation Warp Speed. Revelation 12:10, it says, "And I heard a loud voice saying in heaven, now has come salvation and strength and the kingdom of our power and the power of his anointed. For the accuser of our brethren is cast down, which accused them before our power day and night." So the accusers is kategoreo, which is categories, but it means to accuse. And that's why they're setting things up to marginalize everything, put everything into a category to where everyone is labeled the same thing. Just like when I believe that was during the time of the Babylonian Empire, you had Judah, Benjamin, and Levi, right? And instead of saying Judah, Benjamin, Levi, they just called them all Judeans. One broad stroke, Judeans. So it says to accuse before a judge, to make an accusation of an extrajudicial accusation. To be a plaintiff, right? Because they're bringing accusations when in fact they're the main ones. And I was watching the Elder Karatazar's video from Vegas, and he brought out a term. Let's see if I can remember the term. Dog whistling, and Esau's dog whistling Jake. And pretty much what dog whistling is pretty much is just a Esau speaking in code. Give you a good example, that devil, Hillary Clinton, when she said we got these predators, so on and so forth. Predators was pretty much a code word for these young so-called black men, And you got to understand, these devils, they paint a broad stroke. Everybody falls under the same category, because that's how the media is set. The media is set to demonize everybody that is not going along with their program, or just to demonize a nation of people in general. And that's how these devils operate. All right. So the accuser of thy brethren, to charge with some offense. So they're coming. And from some of the videos I've been watching, the National Guard is already in Chicago. And them YNs out there, they're in for a rude awakening, because they think that they're going to be able to fight against, because they bought the bullshit that these military men today. Well, I heard that these military men, the military people today, they're frail, they're in bad health and bad shape and all that. Yeah, the average one is, yeah. But the ones that they're sending for your ass, they're in tip-top shape. And guess what? They know how to shoot. 1 Peter 5:8, be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion, walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. So they're looking to devour Jake, because Jake does not play a significant role in the New World Order. That's why when you see certain movies, about the future, how many times do you really see a Jake in those movies? So the word there is katapino, says to drink down, swallow down, to devour, to swallow up, destroy. So that's what they plan on doing. They plan on destroying Jake. That's why they're causing all these things, and they're causing that racial tension again. With this fine young woman, this beautiful girl, she was innocent, and this maniac, this scumbag, just she sits down, and all of a sudden he pulls out a knife and just so-called stabs it in the neck. And then I saw the video. Some of you brothers saw it. They show him getting up, hit her a couple of times, and then walk off. And then you look at her, she's just sitting there like, oh my God. You saw her neck. There was nothing going on the neck. Then all of a sudden she starts convulsing and dropping, and then she falls to the ground, and you see blood on the seat. And like the dude said, what she was that time of the month. Then all of a sudden you see, here it is. She got her throat slit, right? So, allegedly, and she's reaching up for something, and all of a sudden you see this big thing of ketchup or blood, so-called blood, squirting out, into the, underneath the thing, and then it just stops. I digress. So let's go from there to Psalms 83. Matter of fact, let's go back. Salaka, let me let this read. So this devil is creating a recipe for disaster. Matter of fact, I might read a little bit of Isaiah 19, Lord's will. 1 Peter 5 and 9, whom resist. So when this devil, which is a spiritual demon Satan, using Esau and these different paramilitary groups, police forces, and all that, is coming. That's what they plan on doing, like a roaring lion. That's why the scriptures say they shall be as madmen, sparing none. Yep, that was sleight of hand, like a motherfucker. That's right. That's right. It says so. So this is an instruction to us when these things start happening. Whom resist steadfast in the faith, knowing that the same afflictions are accomplished in your brethren that are in the world. Yeah, because it's going to get really bad out here. Jacob's trouble is coming. Ain't nothing gay about Jacob's trouble. Jacob's trouble is coming. Whether you're ready for it or not. That's why it behooves you to learn this information, get it into your brains, to your spirit, and pray. And then when this whole shit goes down, that pray the Lord protect all of us, because we all pray that we are part of the elect. Let's go to Psalms 83. There was something else that came to mind, but it's okay. Psalms 83 and 1. Keep not thou silence, O Most High, hold not thy peace, and be not still, O power. For lo, thine enemies make a tumult, and they that hate thee have lifted up the head. Yeah, because to create a tumult is to have it's a commotion. So the tumult that they're creating is they're all coming together with the same goals, the same conspiracy to come against the people of the Lord, Yahweh Bashem Yahushai, the Israelites, you so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians. Salakia, the word for tumult is hamah, to murmur, growl, roar, cry aloud, mourn, rage. Just a perfect example of it was the letter that them heathens were writing to the king, during the time of Ezra when the temple was being rebuilt. To do what? To stop the building. It says, rage, sound, make noise, tumult, be clamorous. All right, so they're stirred up against us. Why? Because the Lord got them stirred up. Matter of fact, it just came back. Let me just get this in case we go to it. And there's a whole lot going on. I mean, there's so much, it's just impossible to keep track of everything. So that's why we're a body. Verse Psalms 83:3. They have taken crafty counsel against thy people and consulted against thy hidden ones. Right, the Israelites, so-called Negroes, Latinos, and Native American Indians. Because we are the main target. They have said, come and let us cut them off from being a nation, that the name of Israel may be no more in remembrance. They're trying to wipe us out. Period. Because Esau wants his birthright back. But you can't get it back because it was never yours to begin with. You were just keeping it warm. Inside joke. You were just holding on to it until that fateful day that, the Lord sent a mighty trained hunter out to the field and you didn't catch shit. And no matter how expert you were with that bow, you didn't catch shit. So you had to sell your birthright for a bowl, a bowl of soup with some meat in it, some lentils and stuff. For they have consulted together with one consent. They are confederate against thee, right? So this is a conspiracy. The tabernacles of Edom. Esau is on the top. The Edomites are the top, and the Ishmaelites of Moab, and the Hagarenes, Gabal, and Ammon, and Amalek, which are the head of you devils, the Amalekites. It says the Philistines with the inhabitants of Tyre. But remember, brothers, thou shalt not abhor an Edomite. Ashur also is joined with them. They have hope in the children of Lot, Selah. Do unto them as unto the Midianites, as to Sisera, as to Jabin, at the brook of Kison. which perish at Endor, they became as dung for the earth, right? Because the Lord is going to tear, these nations' ass up. Because he's not just coming for Esau, he's coming for you nations too. We just get on Esau the most because he's the one in power. He's the one that got a serious ass whooping coming to him. But all of you are going to be partaker in this futuristic ass whipping. Isaiah 34:1. Come near, you nations. It's talking about you heathens, to hear and hearken, ye people. Let the earth hear and all that is therein, the world and all things that come forth of it. This is the message that you should be listening to, because we are made prophets to the nations. For the indignation or the righteous anger of the Lord is upon all nations, and his fury upon all their armies. He hath utterly destroyed them. He hath delivered them to the slaughter. So you're going to be delivered to the slaughter. That's the message that you should be listening to. So back in Psalms 83:12, I'm going to jump to the 12th verse. Who said, let us take to ourselves the houses of God, of the Most High in possession. O my power, make them like a wheel, as a stubble before the wind. As the fire burneth the wood, and as the flame setteth the mountains on fire, so persecute them with thy tempest. And this hasn't happened yet. This is going to happen during the destruction. And make them afraid with thy storm. Yeah, the Lord's going to bring an ass-whooping storm to your ass. The destruction of a storm of fire and lasers from the chariots. Fill their faces with shame, that they may seek thy name, O Lord, power. Why? Because they're going to be howling in that day. It says, let them be confounded and troubled forever. Yea, let them be put to shame and perish, that men may know that thou, whose name alone is Yahweh, B'Shem Yahushai, art the Most High over all the earth. That's right. And that's how that's the day when the Lord is going to be magnified, when he comes back. So let's read a little bit of this and then we can close out. Isaiah 19:1, the burden of Egypt. Yeah, this is going to be a burden to you. Behold, the Lord Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai rideth upon a swift cloud. And that's that chariot that's going to come tear your ass up. And shall come into Egypt, America, and the idols of Egypt shall be moved at his presence, and the heart of Egypt shall melt in the midst of it. And I will set the Egyptians against the Egyptians. You see that. You see, civil war brewing, raising up. And they shall fight everyone against his brother and everyone against his neighbor, city against city and kingdom against kingdom, right? Because it's going to be a worldwide event. Remember, it says it's going to be a time such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time, that people shall be delivered. Those that are found written in the book. And the spirit of Egypt shall fail in the midst thereof. We seeing small hints of that, with people already in a desperate mindset. Economically, they can't pay their bills. They can't, they're crying and complaining because they'll get 8 things at a store and spend $350. And I will destroy and that's because of inflation. And inflation has nothing to do with the prices of goods rising. It has everything to do with the currency that you use being devalued. And I will destroy the counsel thereof, and they shall seek to the idols and to the charmers and to them that have familiar spirits and to the wizards, right? And you're not going to be able to do anything. You've been riding with this whole enchantment spirit, going way back, prognosticating, enchantments, witchcraft and all that. But that's come to an end. Because those same demons that you've been, talking to, conjuring up, work for the Most High, Yahweh B'Shem Yahushai. How about that? And the Egyptians will I give over into the hand of a cruel Lord. And this got to be Trump because, look at what the fuck he's doing. We read about the Posse Comitatus Act and the War Powers Act of 1973 that limits the power of the president, from enacting or taking the military and deploying them whenever he wants, abroad or even domestically. But this devil don't give a shit. That's why you have the National Guard in Chicago as we speak, from the videos that I've seen. So from the videos that I've seen, they're saying that they're there. I'm look more into it, see, what else is going on. And, you have brothers in Chicago, and they can testify, you know, if anything's going on out there, you know. But there's a lot going on, man. So Trump is creating a recipe for disaster. And a fierce king shall rule over them, saith the Lord Yahweh Shemel Shah, the Lord of hosts. And the water shall fall from the sea, and the river shall be wasted and dried up. Yeah, because he's bringing nothing but hardships. He promised you the world. He promised change. He promised things get better because, you know, Biden was destroying stuff. Well, guess what? He's worse than Biden. And we're happy. We're glad. We're happy that he's in there because he's helping to push the prophecies forward a lot faster. You know? Now I'm gonna leave it at that. You know, I'm gonna leave it at that. So pretty much, you know, like I said, you know, it just started off with the chat, some thoughts that came into mind about civil liberties and if Trump's actions are you know, threatening the civil liberties and so on and so forth. And you see what's going on. So Trump is creating a recipe for disaster. He's creating a recipe for disaster. So with that, you know, stay prayed up. You know, I pray that you brothers and few sisters were edified. Until the next time I say, Shalom.